Hey, welcome to the Masterclass after party, our podcast time. So good to have to be joined here this afternoon with some amazing next gen pastors. We just heard some great content with Sandi, Killeen from Rivercross Church, and joined here by some of our next gen pastors. I guess we're kind of representing Southern New Brunswick quite well, I think, today. As I kind of look across the screen, I think we're from St. Stephen to Sackville. I think we're all kind of stretched across the southern part of the province. So why don't we just take a minute and we'll introduce ourselves. My name's Dan Pike. I'm hosting today, and I'm the Director of Youth and Family with CBAC.
I can go next. My name is Dan McGuire. I'm the Youth and Family Life Pastor at Union Street Baptist in St. Stephen.
I can go next. I'm Kim Butler. I'm the pastor of spiritual growth, actually, at Atlantic Community Church, but I am also in charge of the middle school youth group here in Sussex at Adhoc.
And I am Zach Peabody. I am the pastor of family and community connection at Church by the Lake in Sackville, New Brunswick.
I'm Sandi Killeen. I'm the youth and family pastor of Rivercross Church in St. John.
And Sandi just spent the last little while kind of walking us through really this content around loving Gen Z and Generation Alpha well. And there was a lot of solid content in there, really good lessons and reminders to us as church leaders, probably a lot of things that maybe we haven't heard before. But really just speaks so highly of the value of investing relationally in our young people. And I don't think this is something that even just as next generation leaders we need to be thinking about for ourselves, but this is really a question that all of our church leaders should be asking and thinking about and really considering how do I love our teenagers and our kids even better. So kind of the nature of the podcast, as the Masterclass podcast usually runs, is we've basically got two questions that we want to ask each person. One is, what did you hear that you never heard before today? And the second question is, what did you hear that was gold? And so I want to start with the first question and just to ask each of you, what did you hear that you never heard before? And Sandi, feel free to respond and to jump in at any point too, as people are giving the comments. But what was new to you? What had you never heard before today?
I think for me, something that I had never heard before was the part about how coming out of the pandemic, I forget if it was Gen Z or Gen Alpha, but they are more attuned to basically they're just being more attuned and wanting to know more about God over the other generations, which is something really it's inspiring to think about in a season where there could have been so much decline and so many of our churches in Atlantic Canada were not adept to the media side of things. This was a moment where a lot of change and growth happen, and we may not have noticed it ourselves in the churches that we are involved in. But as Sandi pointed out in the masterclass, which again, if you're listening to this podcast, I highly recommend it. There's the free plug. You're welcome, Sandi. No, I'm just joking. But she had mentioned that there are people that have met Sandi that she has not met in person. And I think that is a huge, huge testament to the fact of the thing that I had never heard about before until today. And I think it was a great example, a great opportunity for us as leaders in the church.
Something that was really interesting to me about that topic too, because at first it's hard not to be a little smug and be like, oh, look at us, we're reaching Gen Z so well. But also it's just kind of more natural, right? Because they have grown up with social media. They consume content on YouTube all the time. And so they're just a lot more comfortable than some of our older generations, kind of slipping in and out of YouTube versus in person versus live streaming versus catching up later in the week. And it feels more like a natural rhythm for them to which is really interesting and encouraging in a way, because I don't know about the rest of you, but I can remember preaching to an empty room during the pandemic, and there are cameras, and thinking, why am I even doing this? What is the purpose of this? Or is anyone even watching this? And so it was encouraging to see the way that God can just redeem the things that we wouldn't expect him to use in ways that we couldn't expect him to use.
Yeah, and just as an Atlantic Canadian perspective on that too, we did some research through the earlier in the pandemic, kind of asking students about their response to faith and how they were growing in their faith. And that was actually a trend that we saw in some of the research that we did, and is just seeing some of that growth in faith in the students who filled out our questionnaires, and having the option of having that technology available to them to connect with their churches and their youth groups was a real gift to them through the pandemic. And so it's encouraging to see that.
It does raise a question about, like, do we want to keep pushing them to, when you talked about how they really value relationships? I'm always concerned with, like, okay, should we be giving them a lot of content, or should we actually be trying to push them towards in-person, incarnational ministry?
I was reading, who's it by? I think it was a blog by Carey Nieuwhof, and he was talking about just that very question, like, do we keep doing live stream now? Do we keep generating content? Why do we generate content? And he used the analogy actually of Taylor Swift, who marketed herself just really well over the course of the pandemic, and her really good online content led to her shows being so sold out that it crushed Ticketmaster and gave everyone who worked there a really stressful month of work. And so he had kind of commented that as much as we want genuine relationships, an effective online presence can actually lead people into something in person. And so that was a little encouraging for me, just because so much of what we do necessarily still has to be that way, right? Live streaming is kind of here to stay, and the internet isn't going anyplace. But I think if we are deliberate with our strategies, we can generate something that is meaningful and relational enough that it will guide people to meet us in real life.
What else did we hear that was new to us that we'd never heard before?
I was surprised with the stat that talked. Now, the stat, Sandy, you might have to correct me, and you might not know it right off, but it was, I think, 24% of young people without adult mentors never feel like their life has meaning or purpose. But you said that just one adult relationship changed that, reduced it to 6%. That really both floored me and excited me. Like, wow, what a possibility, what opportunities are there for just some mentoring relationships? That is something we've talked about here for a long time, but maybe haven't pushed the way I felt inspired and encouraged to today.
That one really stuck with me too. And it's been like the constant thing that is on my brain in my resting moments, just the idea of how, if that is true, then how can we facilitate more of these relationships? And I wondered even, like, so we took our youth on a youth retreat for the weekend to Snyder Mountain Ranch, and it was awesome. And then we came back and we all went to church together. And it was the same youth that are always in our church, but we were just all together. And we came in the church in this parade of young people, and all of the grown-ups said, wow, where did all of these teenagers come from? I don't know if I've seen them before, because they're kind of just scattered around, right? Or they're hidden in the back youth room. And I wonder if there are ways even that we can empower the adults in our congregation who really love our youth, but just aren't in a season where they can be actively participating in youth ministry. I wonder how it would empower them, even if they just knew that statistic, that one meaningful relationship or one meaningful interaction can change the student's whole week. How would they look for them more on a Sunday morning if we're not all in a big pack?
Yeah, I think that stat is a game changer. I mean, and it's those kind of stats when I've started speaking in churches, like that's what I'm trying to share as I'm speaking in churches too. Where, like, I think the more adults that we get to hear those kind of numbers, it's such a game changer for our student ministries.
And like on that topic too, right? Like with having adult mentors, it doesn't have to be the people like Sandy mentioned that love capture the flag or anything like that. It literally can be the simplest things that you can do as a mentor, right? You don't need to be like over like overhyping or super energetic. You can literally just be like super down to earth and just being like, hey, I have a bunch of books. Do you want to come get a book and read it? Right. Like it can be the smallest things that can really impact our current and upcoming generations.
Who knew that cooking was going to be something that they enjoy doing? That doesn't happen in my house. I wish that did, but it doesn't.
There's still time.
Dan, how about you? What did you hear today that was new?
For me, for something new, just the statistics surrounding like how our young people are looking for God. They're interested in God. That interest is there. They're not, or less so than they were in the past, are opposed to hearing about God and finding that out. But then there is this, at the same time, this growing distrust in like religious organizations and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just, and this should always be our outlook, but then, so how do we continue to increase Christ and lessen us, thinking through that sort of stuff there. And then for my gold, it was around the end, just talking about how we do things. I feel like a lot of times at church, there's these certain things that feel like they're untouchable. Like this is how things work. We have to do it this way. We've always done it this way. Why would we ever change it? But looking at these statistics and understanding how every generation is different, there is stuff that we need to look at and say, okay, maybe how do we switch up youth group? Is there different things we do at youth group? Do we do a completely different program in general? Just thinking about that and thinking about it in ways that, it's not a concrete thing. We can change it if we want to. That was super meaningful for me.
And I find working with Gen Z and Gen Alpha really liberating in that, because they're more inclined to come to it with a spirit of let's try it, right? And if it doesn't work, then it just didn't work. And then you try something different. And so it's been interesting to kind of pitch things to different groups of people. And sometimes some people who have been around forever and they've seen things been done the same way forever will say, well, that would never work, right? And then our young people will say, well, so what if it doesn't work? We'll just try a different thing. And so it's really liberating to give some leadership over to our younger generations, because they're just full of good ideas and enthusiasm and just a why not try attitude.
Yeah. And you'd mentioned how they're creative. One of their main attributes is that they're a creative generation. And so, yeah, just tapping into that deeper than maybe sometimes we even realize we can, with, again, just allowing them to lead, taking ownership of stuff. That also helps them to engage better in their groups and makes them feel even more like they're included. So just really valuable. Because
young people tend to struggle with authority, people authority, scriptural authority. And we know the Bible is like the basis of our faith and belief. Like, is there ways that you have found helpful to push the kids towards understanding that the Bible is the source of life? I think it is more difficult. I'm looking for, I guess, advice on how to help young people see the importance of scripture in a time where everyone is telling them that it's not important.
Yeah, that's a real challenge. I found it helpful to even start relationally there too. So my youth won't care what the Bible says until they care that Jesus says. And so it's first leading them to Jesus and then leading them to a deeper understanding of Jesus through the Bible that I have found helpful. And something I didn't expect to find helpful was I have found TikTok helpful in my pursuit of this, because they will share videos with me, or they will share videos with each other. And it was a few weeks ago at youth group that all of them were talking about why would we even read the Bible? Because I saw this TikTok video that talked about how someone was paid this one time to add something to the Bible. And then that just led us to a natural conversation of how did we get the Bible anyway, right? And how can we know that what is in it is the intended word of God and it isn't someone's personal agenda? And I don't think they would have been interested in that topic if I had just said, hey guys, let's talk about canonicity of scripture. But they were kind of led there naturally by just something that they all shared online. And it led to a good, meaningful conversation in youth group. So I didn't expect that to be helpful, but sometimes even just catching glimpses of what they are seeing and talking about and guiding the conversation that way is really helpful.
That's funny, Sandy. TikTok, I'm just like, no way, Jose, I'm not getting it. But another thing that I learned though, to double down on the first question is the algorithm. I didn't know that I personally don't have TikTok now, but through your conversation, I will be getting it. And I say that with a smile on my face now. It's interesting though, that if you send someone something, then the algorithm takes it to start sharing that more. That's the first thing. And then the second thing, Kim, to kind of answer your question, or kind of question that you threw out there too. And it kind of piggybacks with what Sandy said, is that like relationally, you bring it there. Or you can start there with, for myself, I know, although I didn't start at Jesus when I did this particular example, but we were talking about wisdom a few weeks ago at my church at youth group. And I just explained the fact that hey, there are tons and tons of wisdom that people use today and people follow today. And we can point that back to the Bible, even though it's super, super old. And I get that, but it's actually got some pretty remarkable things. And let me show you what's up, and kind of just relate it to their context. Cause I think of, in the Bible, talking with Paul and the unknown God, kind of relating it back to first getting it to understand their context, and then bringing it forward to the truth of the matter at all. I don't know if that helps either, but.
And again, that's out of a posture of relationship that you've already built with your students too, right? What else was gold today?
Something that I just wanted to focus more attention on was just bring it back to being able to talk with our students about mental health. And that's something I've always, not necessarily struggle with, but how do we bring that up naturally? How do we just allow our students to have that space within our youth groups, or again, whatever our youth ministry is? How do we do that? And maybe do you have any examples of stuff that's worked for you or anything like that?
So a couple of things have been helpful in that. And one is just when you have a relationship with your students and you are honest about what is going on in your own life, right? So they're more interested in learning about Jesus if they know and they believe that Jesus matters to me. And they're more interested in how Jesus can speak to them in their mental health if they know how Jesus has spoken to me in my mental health. And that's not to, burden the teenagers with everything that is going on in my life, but they need to know that if Jesus is real in people's real life, and that works well in relationship. And then the other thing that works well is just small group time. And it's interesting because my high school group meets one night and my middle school group meets another night, and they're just really different dynamics. And our high school group is more likely to share in a small group setting with their small group leader. And it's the same leader who meets with them every week, same two leaders actually. And then our middle school youth group, we don't do boundaries very well in middle school, and everyone is all up in everyone else's business. And we have this beautiful anomaly year where everyone is wonderfully supportive and kind, and it'll never happen again in my entire youth ministry career. But it's this beautiful little supportive community that champions each other really well. So in that context, we tend to share more as a group. And so I think it will depend on the makeup of your youth too, right? And who they naturally have relationships with. And sometimes that person will be you and they will want to talk about it with you. And sometimes it will be their small group leader or someone else that they trust in their life. And it looks like resourcing them really well. Or I have another youth who I only know what she is facing because I know her parents really well. And so the way that we support her and her mental health is we support her parents as her parents support her. And so sometimes it's partnering with the key people who are in those positions of relationship already.
So as a helpful tool on that, things like emotion wheels can be helpful in helping students name their emotions, kind of giving like a visual diagram, and just keeping in mind like this is part of their language now in school. Like my daughter in middle school did a presentation on mental health 2 weeks ago, and so we're not necessarily broaching new ground with our middle school or high school students, but just helping connect it back to their practices of faith, right? And so they already have the language around mental health in ways that even 5 to 10 years ago I didn't see in students in youth ministry.
Dan, can you explain just the emotion wheel? I think I have an understanding of it, but obviously this isn't, well, depending on how the person listens to the podcast, they might not be able to see it if it's audio, but
yeah, and we can provide some links to a resource in the notes too. But it's a visual diagram. It's, there's a number of different emotions that are usually attached to it. But it's usually like a circle, and the emotions are kind of in the different colors, but you can use it just to, kind of gauge students' emotional well-being that particular day. And so maybe it's pointing to, that they're feeling joyful, or maybe they're feeling sad. And depending on the complexity of the emotions wheel, it could be 8, 16, 32 different types of emotions that they could name and do that. But it, tease it in a small group setting just to, hey, how are you feeling today? And they can kind of pick an emotion that's helpful to them, and they can kind of see the visual.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what Sandi said. This is a visual generation too, right? So not having to really, maybe them expressing it is hard enough. They can just easily point to the emotion wheel, and you can get a sense of how they're feeling as well. And that obviously helps with the if you have a relationship, or you're growing a relationship with your youth group, you can kind of get a sense and feel, be like, okay, when they are feeling this emotion, this is how much I can talk to them about this. This is the level of comfortability. And because again, some people or some youth can easily I'm sure they can use those sorts of things and be like, I'm feeling sad, but have a grin on their face, right? They're not like taking it seriously. But to your question though, about what is the not golden nugget, but the golden point for me would be, honestly, it's just that it's God is God, and that that even as Sandi put it at the very end, that God is working and he will bring life to places that seem impossible. And it's not, it is on us to a degree, but it is on God to work in the hearts of these youth, and we can support them, we can encourage them, and just being present with them is the main thing, and God can do the rest.
It's my favorite prayer I pray with my youth leaders after youth group most nights is just that God would take anything that was true and good and of him and help that to be the thing that sticks with our youth. And then all the extra stuff, the stuff that was us, the things that, slipped through the cracks where we didn't have enough attention, anything that was not of him, that would just blow away, and that the things that would stick would be the things that are of him. And I am really thankful that God is faithfully God all of the time.
I think it comes back a lot to authenticity, because you've talked about that. In all these layers, authenticity is like a thread that runs through. Like mental health, they want to hear. I think you'd said from preaching, they want to hear, or one of the quotes that somebody said was like they want to hear in the preaching. And I was thinking, I think that's a lot more than teens. I think and young kids. I think it's across generations now that people are looking for authentic Christians, authentic believers, people who really believe what they say they believe, people who really live what they say they live. And so for me, like the nugget that I came away with, I guess the golden nugget would be this idea that like Kim, driving authenticity in all the areas myself personally with my teams. And because you said that they resist anyone with all the answers. And I think a lot of us grew up in generations too, that was like a badge of honor. If you knew all the answers, even if you didn't, you had to say you knew. And, but there's a level of authenticity there when you can like listen to someone and say, well, let's work through this together. And like, I have some more studying to do as well, where especially as pastors, you're quick to want to like give the right answer. Like, and often even with my own children, I find I have young adult children now, they're like early 20s and stuff. And sometimes I have to stop myself from just, why you believe that? And like take a minute and like, let's talk about why you think that and what you mean about this by the Bible. Like I really have to slow my roll and stop trying to be the expert and listen. And so a lot of those things are something that I both am learning with my own children and have been impacted by what you said today. So,
and I think like that might be part of that reason why there is this sort of lack of trust in some of our institutions now, especially when we think about church culture. So I'm taking a class on church history right now, and it's been very eye-opening and just all the good and the bad that's happened. But definitely today it's promoting, all the kind of the dirty laundry's out there, all this stuff, it's common knowledge for a lot of people. And so making sure that we're doing our best to be authentic is really, really important, because a lot of people come into that relationship with the church already kind of with a negative view. So more important than ever now is just doing that. So.
And to continue with Dan's point, which is really good, that the good and the bad of church culture is that what is equally important, I think, would be to acknowledge all the bad stuff that has happened and say like, you know what? Yeah, we have messed up. We have done this, and not even saying, but it would be more like, we recognize this is what's happened and this is where we're going. This is the steps that we're taking to improve, to recognize all the silly things that we have done. And this is where we're going. And we want to include you in this. We want to be a group of people that loves our community. And how do we do that? Well, this is some ways that we're thinking of, but where do you see it, right? And getting to the core of what they're viewing, what they're seeing with what they're passionate about, and really connecting that to with what God has called us to do.
Yeah, and I think that's where the idea that God is God and I am not God is not only really important for me, but that's really important for my youth, And so when I say things like, I am sorry, or I don't know, then they know that I know that God is God and I am not God. And it frees them to build their relationship with Jesus apart from me, because if they put their faith in me to help them know God, they're going to be disappointed. But if I can guide them to Jesus, then He's going to sustain them through all of the things.
Yeah, that's so good. Thanks so much to each of you for your time this afternoon, and I so appreciate this conversation. And yeah, I just pray that each of us will be encouraged to think about what can we do to invest relationally in our students, but ultimately to remember, like, hey, God is God, and He's got this, and we're able to join Him in that work. So again, thanks so much to each of you for your time this afternoon.